Hello and welcome back to This Is Fine, the podcast where we navigate the treacherous waters of tech and cybersecurity and government. Today, we're diving into the intriguing world of cybersecurity teams, specifically why Purple Team may just be the team of the future. So grab your virtual seatbelt because today we're about to go on a wild ride with our amazing guests, Gabe Abdalawad, detection engineer, Jordan Lazo, associate director of offensive security operations, and Jake Williams, VP of R&D, all from the formidable team here at Hunter Strategy. Welcome, gentlemen. So to start off with basics, if we could maybe go around the room and kind of build on each other's answers a little bit. Let's define blue team, red team, and then ultimately purple team. And when we define these, where do they fit into the organizational security control ecosystem? So to start off with, Jordan, how about you give us some initial definitions?
Okay, yeah, I'll just keep it simple and say the blue team is normally going to be the defense team for an organization. The red team is going to be the offensive team, so the attacking team, let's say. And then purple team is really just the combination of those two. So it's the offensive team working with the defensive team in order to make defense better. That's really the end goal.
And Gabe, do you have anything you wanted to add to that?
To break down the blue team a bit more, just to kind of get an idea of what controls are being changed there. Uh, the goal is to prevent, detect, and respond to various attacks. Implementing various security controls to try to stop or identify the red team and combine it into purple to get continuous improvements.
So, Jake, I saved you for last because you've probably spent the most time on all three teams here from a hunter standpoint. What would you add to kind of the definitions we've had so far?
Yeah, I really look at red exists to make blue better. And I know that annoys lots of red team people when I say it that way. But that for me, that is the reality, right? I look at red when executed properly. I look at red as really an extension of blue, and purple isn't something that you're doing in my mind as a separate activity. It's something that, honestly, we see in the industry today. I look at exists um, largely because we did red teams wrong for so many years, right? For so many years, we had a lot of red team folks that were just like, I can't tell you any of my secrets, or you'll know how to catch us and block us and whatever. And so, and of course, that's not making blue better, right? Maybe sometimes it is, but not the majority of the time there. And so I look at purple as um, you know bringing those teams together to ensure that um, you know the uh, the TTPs, specifically the procedures, are being executed by red, are being detected by blue, and to the extent that they're not, the control changes are being made, and then retests, right? So, uh, yeah.
Well, and to break that down for the dumb executive on this end of the mic, right? Is purple kind of a philosophy of we don't separate our red and blue for the reasons you just mentioned, or is it a third team that's allowed to see both red TTPs and blue TTPs? Like, or can it be both? I mean, how do you see that implemented successfully?
Yeah, I personally don't think you need separate, you know, I don't think you need a separate purple team activity. I think again, purple is something that should be happening organically. Now, I do find value in separating red and separating red and blue from a management perspective because it is, red is a different discipline. It's a different way of thinking about thinking about things. But ultimately they should be where I see we need a purple team is generally, when we have separations in management, they're very siloed. And that's where I see organizations who are effectively investing in people that are taking input from red and input from, and driving actions usually with blue, less input from blue, driving actions with blue. I see that a lot. But I see that generally when the organization is compensating for, silo building or empire building within management structures. And that's not ideal by any stretch of the imagination, obviously.
So said a different way then, because that was what I thought the answer was, but I also, kind of don't oversee these teams every day. perfectly reasonable to have red and blue teams, perfectly reasonable to separate them from a management and functional standpoint. But blue team is kind of a purple team rather, is kind of a mentality shift where the separation is good because of tactics, tools, procedures, skill set, mentality, but it's kind of an umbrella to make sure that they don't live in silos and you don't have red teamers thinking that they're James Bond and sharing the secrets are, somehow hurting the red team. And conversely, that you don't have blue teams with hero syndrome kind of saying like, well, I can't tell you, the traps that I set and the ways that I detected you, because I think it sounds like it should go both ways, right? If a defender is able to detect an attacker, they should be telling them how they did it so the attacker can update their craft. And if an attacker beats a defender, and I've always kind of been of the mentality that attackers, I don't want to say have an easier job, because technically speaking, I don't think that's true. But logically, it's like attackers only need to be right once, defenders always need to be right. And so I feel like there's kind of it needs to be kind of a feeling of equality in sharing on both sides. Does that sound like a reasonable kind of summation of purple teaming from a mentality standpoint?
Yeah, but I want to back away from kind of philosophical, be right all the time, because we can play that on either side of the either side of the coin, right? Defender or offense. I see Jordan nodding, vigorously here, right? But let's just briefly note that yes, 100%, blue should be telling red how they were caught, because this is not one of these where, like, I certainly wouldn't call a threat actor and be like, "Hey, man, well, we've got an IOC that we are routinely catching you with anytime you get into our network." I wouldn't do that, because I want that detection again and again and again, right? But that's real world. And red team getting that same detection again next time is not driving value for blue. It's not. Tell red where you caught them, how you caught them, and make them work. Because good red teams, good. We back up here. I don't want to get into the no true Scotsman thing, but maximally optimal red teams have in-house development capabilities, period. Whether that's the red team operators themselves or dedicated developers, and they are going to zig left and zag right, so that the next time, right, the next time that they go up against you, they are seeing blue is seeing something different. There's some variation. If they still catch it, great. That's a very robust detection, right? And if they don't, now we have new detection engineering to do, right? So that bidirectional sharing, yes, but not just for anti-empire building, reasons, right? Not because it's the nice thing to do. It's because it drives an organizational benefit.
And just so that I kind of turn this into some real world examples, Gabe, as a detection engineer, what would be an example of like a very valuable thing shared with you by a red teamer and a purple team kind of situation?
The number one thing I would love to see is if a detection misses. If Jordan is out there exploiting something I already do have a detection for, and it just doesn't hit, then I did something wrong, and that needs to be fixed. That is a gap, and that just has to be addressed, and it's better that it gets identified in that purple team exercise than for a threat actor to do it. That is the best scenario for that.
And I'm curious, just from your experience kind of working with in kind of these purple team joint engagements, would you say I'm not looking for statistics here, just kind of a gut feel, right? Would you say you more often get told that something was exploited that you believed you had a detection for? Or is it more likely that they're telling you about something that you don't yet have a detection for? And the reason I'm asking the question, just to kind of color your again, I'm asking for like a gut feel here, is is the red team telling you, oh my gosh, there's a thing I've just never would have even thought to build a detection rule before? Or is it more often kind of saying, well, I had a detection rule for that concept, but like it was done in a novel way, or I built that theoretically, and now that it was actually done, it behaved differently than I understood it to behave when I built that detection rule?
So I think it leans more towards the things that have already been built. There is one part of it that is theoretical. You can build a detection on theory, and then if it just doesn't work, it has to be improved. And you see those all the time. you have to build a lot of detections based on theory because you can't exploit a vulnerability that doesn't have a POC released for it. That's just not possible unless you were to find the original vulnerability. So you build that based on theory, and then when it does come out, you test it. And then there are always new ways to exploit things that are already done. MITRE is MITRE is the classic. It's a common misperception that there is one way to exploit a MITRE technique. And there's so many different ways. And being sure that you have the new ways, the old ways is important.
And Jordan, kind of flipping to the other side, right? When you get told how you get caught, right? Does that kind of shut a door for you, right? Like it's like now I got to go in through a window, or is it more of a okay, the door is shut and this little lock slip that I used to use doesn't work, but like I got a key bump too and I'm going to try that next time just to kind of put some physicality to it for people that don't think in the same terms.
Yeah, I would say it's a little bit of a mixture of the 2, and sometimes maybe you need to come in through the roof or tunnel your way in through the basement wall and blast your way in. I mean, these are things that sometimes, the detections are set up to cover the windows, the doors, other common places, but maybe it's super loud, but it wouldn't be detected because the detections aren't set up to cover it if we blast a hole in through the basement, for example. Uh, so, I mean, eh, it essentially just says, "Okay, this is the pathway that we kind of expected you to come in. So if we get caught, most of the time it'll pull up the incident response plan, right? But in a real world scenario anyway. But with the purple team, we don't have to worry about the device being like isolated or connections being cut or anything like that. We can just look for another way. And this is exactly what Gabe was saying is now he sees that detection worked. Maybe that same detection pathway we will still target, but we'll just use it in a different way. We'll attempt to break through in a different way.
So, just trying to kind of jump on top of this a little bit and bring this to a higher level because we're talking about mature organizations mostly that have a blue team and have a red team, even if that red team is outsourced and brought in by another firm or something, and whatnot. What would be, and I'm going to look to you for this one, Jake. What would we tell organizations that are less mature, right? They might have an IT team. They have maybe some people within the IT team that are responsible for what we would call blue team activities. Absolutely no form of red team to speak of. How do you help an organization like that look into if they kind of come and say, I want a purple team? And I to add physicality to it for listeners that don't have it, it's kind of like coming in with a paintbrush that has like a little bit of blue paint on it, absolutely no red on the palette, but they're
Mhm.
asking you about purple.
Yep. I was looking for my little KVM, the little monitor sharing box, but typically just as a prop. But what I would typically do with that, that kind of organization is I don't need any advanced TTPs, right? You haven't done any detection engineering internally in that kind of organization, but there's a lot of baseline detection engineering that we can do, right? That every EDR out there, has every EDR out there has detections for everything. That's how everybody gets 100% on MITRE ATT&CK every year. But saying they have a detection for it and saying you will see that alarm are two very, very different things. Because all of those detections are informational or low and they're suppressed, or you get 10,000 alarms a day, and that same organization with 2 people can't handle that. So, my typical approach there is to come in, if they say they want a purple team, is to come in, and whether we do this remotely or locally, but ultimately where they are side saddling effectively with me, and that's one of the reasons I have the monitor splitter box, right, so that they can always see what I'm doing, right. One of the things we typically do in these purple teams is, we're not going to land a phishing payload or whatever to get in. We're starting to assume breach, right. And so I want to be able to see my attacker machine as well as from an assumed breach perspective, typically that's pivoting, with a regular domain account through one of their laptops and, or devices, whatever. We've got that all up on the screen together. And then we're going to move through some baseline recon and baseline lateral movement. And I mean the simple stuff. WMI, umic.exe, process call create, right? With a slash node switch. Do we see that, right? By the way, the answer is no, 10 times out of 10, unless we've done detection engineering, right? And so at the end of the day, meaning like at the end of a day, typically we'll have worked through usually between 8 and 10 procedures, right? And maybe not now, but before we close, we definitely need to come back to a TTP discussion, tactic, technique, procedure, because that term's used a lot together. They are very different things, but we'll have worked through, like I said, 8 to 10 procedures, created detections for those. And it really, it's a teach them how to fish kind of thing. I do not expect them to go out and execute lots more, threat actor procedures, right? But again, we're learning the process, the methodology for both the how do I engineer a detection, and then to Gabe's point, how do I test to make sure that detection's actually going to fire in at least some situations, right? Obviously, you can't cover all situations there, but you can say in this situation, at least we know this has some efficacy in working. So
So I think that that's especially helpful because again, it happens a lot, right? People come in and I can't tell, and the extreme example is when people come in and say, "How do I protect against 0 days?" And I'm like, "You don't even have EDR, man. Like, what are you
yeah,
what are you doing?" And so
well,
I that's like kind of that version of somebody that is a little more nuanced, right? They kind of know, but then they hear purple team as like a maybe this is a way I can get around building a blue team or whatever. And I think your model is kind of okay, let me show you why you need a blue team and let's talk about that with the purple mentality, right? Let's kind
right,
of show both sides of it so you can kind of feel like the threat actor that I'm emulating right now to hopefully justify creating, standing security capacity. So I think
uh-huh,
that's a really just how I heard your answer, right? That was kind of how I heard it is like, well, we're not going to skip you to purple team, but I'm going to simulate that in front of you and the screen splitter is going to let you look at that. And then ultimately the goal is build a damn blue team because again, much easier to outsource a red team than a blue team. So I think that is an interesting way of doing it without saying no. You're skipping a color on the color wheel, right? Which is
yep.
how a lot of engineering focused people would have answered the question. They wouldn't have been wrong, but it wouldn't have gotten them towards any useful end goal either.
Right. And I feel justified in doing these, by the way, right? Even knowing that this is not like, to your point, right? You're skipping, there's no question of skipping steps. That's not the ideal way to do it. But at the end of that day, having covered several recon and lateral movement techniques, and now having dedicated alarms that are going to fire, and that 1 or 2 person shop is going to know what they mean when they fire, right? It's not just a random alarm like another alarm. Okay, woohoo! But it's not malware, so it's because now we're talking living off the land stuff in a lot of cases, and so there's a real security benefit at the end of the day. Meaning at the end of that engagement, there's a very tangible security benefit there. But I'm interested to pitch over to Gabe about detection engineering. There, how do you deal with detection engineering when you have folks that almost think that's not a thing? Why doesn't my EDR and SEM already catch it? How do you address that concern? Because I get that question quite a bit.
I tend to lean towards something along the lines of EDRs aren't perfect. They expect a lot of normal activity and say it's okay, as you previously mentioned, informational alerts, because administrative activity and red team activity or attacker activity is very close. It is very common for like a domain administrator, just someone working in administration, to run normal discovery or recon commands. How do you say this is what an attacker does and here's what's normal? And an EDR can't do that, but something specifically made for your environment that you know what's normal, what's not normal. Let's fire an alert on what isn't normal from that. That's a lot of value that's very specific, and an EDR just can't do that.
That's fantastic. I like that.
And I think that that also speaks to kind of a similar kind of goal that I think you were talking about, Jake, in just trying to show people the activities and the exercises, because so many people are. I can't tell how often I'm in sales cycles with AJ when it's kind of like, why do we need a security team? We spend X dollars on IT every year. Are you saying they're not doing it securely? And again, security engineering and IT engineering is very different than security monitoring, very different than detection engineering. You could follow every here's how you set up this tool out of the box, following all of the vendor guidance, and absolutely still be vulnerable. And it's hard, right? There's no like shortcut to making the right rules for your organization, because the rules will vary even the tiniest bit between organizations, and that difference is the hole that Jordan crawls right into in trying to avoid the detection rules. So I think that that's a really good point for people that are kind of listening and wondering, why do I need to have security as an, like, shouldn't all my IT people be doing security? And to some degree, sure, right? I'm not suggesting that we have some people whose job it is to not care about security to be on your IT team, but that's the difference between having somebody whose dedicated focus is security and somebody else whose dedicated focus is functionality. And very senior, very seasoned people that have done it in many places can sometimes have both sides of that brain. But one, those are hard people that are very hard to find. And two, those people are very expensive to bring in house when IT is not your business, right? We have all kinds of people like that here at Hunter, but that's literally all we do every day for our customers. If you're a retail company, hell, even if you're a bank and a successful bank, IT is an instrument to make financial transactions occur, not what you do every day. And the push and pull of having people that kind of pull security to one side and IT people and software engineers to push functionality to the other side is frankly very healthy. And the way that you're able to not just hire the most, a team of the most expensive engineers that have been doing both sides of that in multiple organizations. That's if they're available. Forget the fact that, say you have an infinite amount of money, there aren't that many of them, and it's way more sustainable to grow them than it is to hire them, because let's be real, if you're not, a lot of those types of people also get bored after they figure out your organization. They're not finance people, they're not retail people. They kind of solve the problem of getting it to a certain point and then they leave. And then there's decay, because it's a thing that doesn't, you can't, we can't, as many times as I'll tell my government customers this, you can't say we did a security, now let's shift to and that's too often the thought process of people is like that, we're done the thing, so now we're done all those pieces and it'll just kind of live forever that way. And there are some tools and ways to make it last longer and to slow decay without having the same expense as RDT&E. I'm not saying there's not, but there's definitely a balance there. And the less nuanced your leadership is in deciding that shift, the more likely you're either going to overspend on your resources, you're going to overspend on your O&M, or you're going to shift into a mode of decay, which is going to cost you money when you're ultimately breached, which is the end result of most decays. So anyway,
Uh,
without getting too far on that tangent.
that also brings me to the thoughts of, okay, if I thought of a solution that might slow that decay to a point where we wouldn't have to worry about it so much, I think the developments of AI, especially in machine learning capabilities and stuff like that, that I think that ideally it would do a good job, but it seems like currently in the industry, it's not. Next to some vendors, I guess I don't really want to mention, but they do have the capabilities in place. However, it's still now it's just another one of those things where that machine learning algorithm itself or whatever they're using for the AI, let's say, uh, it's still going to have that little gap that I'm going to look for and eventually find. It's just a matter of time.
I'd like to pull on that thread because it's not that I don't think AI can help there. Maybe it can. When I thought of what approaches you can take to avoid decay, I think of cloud. I think of shared responsibility where it's not my database. And don't get me wrong, all you're doing is just shifting your security responsibility to a vendor. So it's not like there's any magic in cloud. I hate when people think of cloud as like an abracadabra word, but like when I don't own Oracle anymore on my premises, and I'll just pick on Oracle because no one's ever gotten in trouble for doing that. Don't sue me, Oracle attorneys. But just as if you're gonna not have Oracle on your premises and do that in RDS, just to have Amazon in the example as well, the patching and the things that are typically, again, Oracle DBAs are expensive. Maintaining an Oracle rack server is expensive. Forgetting the insane license price, the O&M and upkeep of that server to keep it patched and running, and making sure that all of the queries still run the same way, your patching didn't create a bottleneck of the storage mechanisms, etc. That is pricey. And to me, it's cloud is the way that you avoid that, because you've just moved all of that responsibility to a vendor. You're paying a premium for it, but you're paying a premium for it that I think is worth it when you consider the total cost of ownership of that application. Same goes for container hosting, right? There's always new fun container escapes that are in your Kubernetes environment. But when you use GKE, AKS, EKS to host it, you have an entire company whose literally only job it is to update and avoid those container escapes from happening. And that was kind of what I envisioned with these are the ways to slow decay. Again, I don't think it stops it by any means, but I'm curious, Jordan, if you had any specific thoughts in mind. I use AI all the time. I'm not like an anti-AI person, but that's not what I thought of when I thought of how to slow decay in some environments. So I'm curious if you had any specific thoughts of how that would work for you, or anybody else, not just pick on Jordan. You're just the one that mentioned it.
Yeah, I think the broad stroke is just that the machine learning algorithms or AI, let's say, implementation, sh- it should do a really good job at being able to correlate vastly separated and different types of data into one kind of pointer, which should make alerting capabilities more enhanced, you'd think. And sometimes it does, and sometimes it doesn't, because as you implement these systems, the complexity grows with that. And then also, once you are, let's say, moving to cloud, I definitely agree it does slow the decay down, but it's also you're opening yourself up to different aspects of vulnerable software that they might use. I mean, for example, there's like Microsoft is always having a breach of some sort or some type of vulnerability in their software that's been there for years, stuff like that. And I mean, we're putting all of our trust and our money into this cloud platform, and most of the time it is really good, but it seems like those couple times a year that it's bad, it's really bad. It's very, very bad, and it's like a massive breach, and it's a bunch of different companies, and it's been happening for 6 months and nobody knew, that type of stuff.
Well, and to pull on that, because I think that's an interesting point. I think that to kind of summarize what you were saying before is that the AI, the machine learning, is to help reduce the people that are reading logs, spot decay early, kind of reduce the team size that's necessary to kind of keep things working the same. And I could see that corollary. But the point that you made on cloud is well taken, and I think you are referring to when the configurer of the cloud tenant does everything right, does everything they're supposed to do, and still has a breach at the cloud service provider level, which absolutely happens. I think that's the minority of issues in cloud, although certainly they're big gaping issues. But how many massive breaches have happened because people don't fully understand still how to configure an S3 bucket? Right. And so there's a lot of new threat surface that comes in cloud, and very proprietary approaches to securing it, where it's still incumbent on the workload owner to do all of that. And I'd say the vast majority of cloud breaches are people that don't really understand how they're supposed to do cloud right. And all of that comes before what you just mentioned, which is, again, absolutely valid, right? Even more valid, I think, in cloud identity tools, because I just saw another Okta breach pretty recently. And I love Okta. It's a great tool. We use it here at Hunter. Thankfully, we're in the government tenant, which seems to have been isolated from most of the recent breaches. But I think in SaaS platforms that are very focused on functionality, these breaches happen. Not that they don't happen in IaaS and PaaS platforms, but I think in SaaS platforms they happen even more often because there's such a split in diverse functionality that is kind of being pumped through, and with that, attack surface widening. And then you get to your AWSs and your Microsofts where they're, in Microsoft's case, I mean, there's a little bit of SaaS in Amazon, but the biggest driver of finance for Microsoft Cloud is their SaaS platform in 365. And so that's just similar to Okta, to Salesforce, to all of those others. You're just pumping out functionality as fast as you can. And with that, vulnerabilities. And because the line between Azure and 365 from a security tenancy level is changing and very nebulous, one definitely affects the other. There's no way for you to convince me that they don't. So I think that's a really interesting point.
And it seems like as well, the documentation on the functionality coming out lags behind too. So it's like as fast as people are to jump onto the new functionality and implement it, there's like a really loosely worded, maybe first version of the documentation on how to implement it, and they're like, "Yeah, let's do it anyway because it's awesome." And then it kind of gets left behind in the dust. But I just wanted to throw that out there.
No, absolutely. And that's a lot of times why people do it wrong in the cloud tenant ownership is I've heard this feature is coming. I've been tracking it forever. It just came out. I'm running with it. And not all the docs are there yet. And even if all of the security functionality is there and in place, how to use it's not well known. Even if all the docs that say how to use it is there and ready, not all of the examples are there. And
Yeah,
reading a tech doc from Microsoft is almost as fun as reading one from Amazon. Neither of them are, it's amazing when you look at the examples and how they age over time. And it's kind of like the don't drink the water signs at the Disney parks on the grounds. You're kind of like, how many people drank the water before they put up the sign, right? Like you start seeing the examples in cloud docs and you're like, you would think that that was an obvious implementation. I'm really curious why they have that in there. But like,
yeah.
then you kind of realize, well, yeah, definitely a bunch of people did it wrong. And this is their answer. There's no technical solution. You just need an example to kind of hand feed it to people.
Matt, I have to come in here with a quick story, right? So, and with the whole the whole why is this a problem? Like, why am I being briefed on this? And I think it was 90. I want to say I was flown down to Fort Leonard Wood to attend some demo training, and the demo instructor, we're down there with a bunch of basic training. Well, basic trainings. They're the engineering folks, right? And like early AIT. And the guy says, do not, I repeat, do not put the C4 in your mouth. And I I'm thinking to myself, this cannot be a problem. And then look down the line and see someone taking plastic. He's like, it is poison, it will kill you. And the guy's taking plastic explode. He's like, just wanted to know what it tastes like. And it was one of those real time kind of moments of like, this can't be a problem, seeing that indeed, obviously, it's a recurring problem, right? And that for me has helped long term. It's like every time I hear somebody brief something where I'm like, this can't be an issue, right? I think of the C4 bubblegum guy, right? And then immediately remember, no, it's going to be an issue, right? It'll blow up your network too. So anyway,
No, I think that, I mean, it's obviously an extreme example, but I think that there are any number of cloud equivalents of that, right? Where it's like, what do you mean you just put the bucket with all of your secrets and made it public? right? Like, what do you? I think that I mean, it's obviously not as obvious to a person that does. Everybody knows what C4 is. You've seen a movie. There are plenty of cloud equivalents of that where when I see the example, I'm like, there's no way that people didn't know that this was how you're supposed to do it. But to your point, yeah, there's a guy that thought C4 could be chewed like bubblegum. So let's not judge each other or assume anything, and let's try to put good UX on the dock so that the people that do know not to choose C4 can skip over that section very quickly. There was a great just for myself today, literally today, I had to retake because annually DoD requires this insider threat awareness training, and I saw a thing that let you test out of it without taking the course, and I was just like, okay, that sounds good. Then it gives you this warning of like you have to get 100% of the answers right, or you have to take the course again. And I'm just like, I'm probably gonna get some answer wrong and need to take this stupid class again. And then I took it, and it was 6 questions, and all the answers were report it to your security manager. Every one of them. It didn't matter the scenario. Like, as I got to the fifth one, I'm like, maybe there's like, I started like tricking myself of like, maybe this is the one where you call law enforcement, or maybe this is the one where you're supposed to neither confirm nor deny to the person that's like, maybe it's not. I'm like, no, I'm gonna go with it. It's reported to your security manager. And every time I was right, and then I got to get my little certificate after 6 questions and save the taxpayers a couple of hours of time that would have otherwise been billable. So I it's there's a reason why they make everybody do it every year. There's a reason why it's important that it gets done. And I almost kind of like, I was making fun of it as afterwards, but I was like, I'm glad that they have this 6 question test out approach, right? They've made it so somebody like me who maybe overthought it at question 5 and 6 for an extra 60 seconds still got to save an hour of taking the course again. But they didn't, I now, just by telling the story, just by kind of thinking about it, I'm going to remember the answers to those questions for at least the next year. And so it's the who do you tell when some random person's asking about your secure cleared job is very much the equivalent of the C4 bubblegum thing. Like, yeah, you report that to your security manager. What else would you do with that information? But it's not stupid just because you know the answer. And then the question is how do you have a good user experience so that for people that do know the answer don't get negative about the subject? And DoD actually found a reasonable middle ground there. It's unusual for the department. That's why I bring it up. It was a good example of a bright spot of where that's supposed to work. So switching back to purple teams for a second here, because I think we got a little off topic, but in a good way. If we could try, well, one is, are there arguments against having a purple team mentality? And if so, what are they? And it could be as simple as, nope, anybody who doesn't do purple team is dumb. That's a perfectly reasonable answer in this context. But just for the sake of, obviously, we're very pro purple team approach here at Hunter. And it's something that we push really hard to our customers. And we've had examples where people will say, we'll give you $500,000 to do this crazy nation state emulating red team exercise. And our answer will be, you could spend half of that money with us, get a lot of value, and put the other $250,000 into your blue team, which isn't even business for us. But we'll tell them that first. That's how much we think that this approach is valid. But on the intellectual spectrum, are there arguments against it, and what are they?
Well, one is, let's say I'm that organization that has the 500K, and I want a cool nation state emulation threat to attack us. It just doesn't look as cool if it's a purple team. I mean, the cool factor is the same reason that when you see cool commercials and people, you might be looking at it thinking like, man, this commercial sucks. But a lot of people, or maybe it's a minority of people out there, are thinking, wow, that's the coolest thing ever. I need to buy it right now. It's kind of the same concept there too. When it's like maybe it's a more mature organization, they've been around the block a few times, they've got years, they've got the teams, everything, and they just know what they want and they want it now. It's kind of like shut up and take my money type of thing. But on the inverse of that, you might say the purple team is the way to go, and like you said, we'll offer it to them, and we'll say, the purple team is going to give you a lot more actionable artifacts, and it's going to give you a path forward to make sure that you improve your environment. Um, they'll still say, yeah, you know what, we want the cool. We want to know what it feels like to be attacked by the nation state, or maybe they already have and they want to know it again.
I think of that scene in Arrested Development where the car salesman is selling Michael on like, here's a car that like it meets all your needs and it has it. And he's like not excited. And he goes to the next one and he's just like, just like a minivan and it does this and that, not excited. And he's just like, what about that? And he like points to the Corvette and he's like, I don't know. Like I've never sold one. Like it's super gas guzzling and it's flashy and we give you that, like, well, does it come with the little glasses on? It's like, yeah, it comes with the glasses because like we get so many tickets. We're like just trying to do anything we can to distract it. And he's like, all right, I'll take it. So that's I wouldn't have thought of that as a reason, but I do think it's a valid one, right? Some people like the cool factor. That's why very impractical, very uncomfortable sports cars exist. And other, things that people, and again, I'm not saying those aren't cool. If I had a lot of extra money around, maybe I'd own a cool and impractical and uncomfortable sports car, but I don't, and it's not where I'd like to invest my money. And so any electric car drives pretty fast, so I'm pretty happy with that. But that is a good answer. I'm curious if anybody else has one because that might be the only one that it's certainly the I didn't even think there was one, but I like that as a I did, I respectfully disagree with it, but it is a valid answer to the question.
I was going to be cheeky and come in and talk about, political infighting is a great reason not to do purple. But, there are some big name organizations that you and I can both name that have some real political infighting challenges. And, honestly, you trying to force purple might actually be a detriment to security in those in those organizations where you're and most of the time, when we're directly impacting blue, right? I mean, if it somehow impacts red, who's not helping blue maximally in that situation anyway, whatever. But if I'm distracting blue because of the political infighting, that's inherent in bringing those teams together, then yeah, I can see that as an argument for not doing it. It's not a good one, right? You should be addressing the root cause of that, but
So I like that too, actually, because not like it like I would support it, but like I think it's a good answer to the question because in some organizations the politics is bad between especially very large defense, intelligence, government, civilian, anything that has so many people and again we're here to talk about government a lot and government organizations are not built on single unified mission of something like profit or product, right? So there's a lot more of a constituency of serving the SES or the general or admiral in charge of said organization and their personality. And yeah, what a terrible place to try to fix that by forcing a purple team exercise. Like if that's the culture, if that's the given and that's what's broken, then deciding like, but I read an article that said purple team is good, even though the red team and the blue team hate each other. They have totally separate lines of communication. There's no coordination among their management. And the way we fix it is by sitting them in a room to do a readout. Like, yeah, you're right. Like, that's probably not going to fix those types of problems. So it's a good reason not to do one. Not, it means you have a broken organization and security also, but it is a good reason that you don't start with a purple team.
that's it, man. Doing that's like taking, knowing that you got a violent dog and walking around with like raw steak in your
Yeah, let's
pocket.
solve it by throwing them in the dog park. That's the
Yeah,
solution.
sure. That'll help, right? So.
Uh, all right. Well, I think we're actually coming up on time here, so I do want to go around the room and kind of ask anyone for any final closing thoughts on not why purple. I think we covered why purple really well throughout this, but maybe a how purple, right? What is if you could think of a one or two kind of this is how you chip away at moving towards a purple mentality And if we could do it, I'll start with Gabe doing it from a detection engineering and kind of blue bias, and then Jordan from a red bias, and then I'm gonna expect Jake to tie everyone together. Who's the most, other than my shirt, the most purple of us all today?
So I would say starting small. It doesn't have to be a big tabletop exercise of set up a purple team and have them try to get in blind. Start with just validating some rules, make sure they work, and then move on, take next steps, iterate. And the goal is improvement and go in with that mindset and collaboration and communication, and you can probably make some improvements.
Thank you, Jordan.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with what Gabe was saying, honestly. Other than I would say if they're kind of new to all the aspects of red team versus purple team, and maybe they haven't done a tabletop, that let's start at the executive level and get the executives familiar with why we do tabletops, why an incident response plan is important, who we're calling on when, who's in charge of this, who does that, and then kind of from the top down say, okay, now we can say this is the red team's responsibility, this is the blue team's responsibility based on our experience from this tabletop. And then further tabletops on the teams themselves and kind of branch down until we get down to the individual operator levels, improving and learning the capabilities.
All right, and Jake, bringing us home.
Yeah, no, I mean, look, anytime, somebody asks like, where do I start with this? I hands on keyboard is not the answer, right? It's just not. You don't need to bring red in initially. Yeah, that can be a later stage. Honestly, can be a later stage thing. Step one for me is inventory of what telemetry do I have available to engineer detections with in the first place. Uh, because Gabe is a fantastic detection engineer, but they can't work magic. They can't make data appear that they don't have, and so they are hamstrung. Every detection engineer is hamstrung by the telemetry that you have available. So start there, right? Identify the obvious gaps because I don't need to generate red team activities, right? TTPs or procedures specifically here. We don't need to generate procedures that I know we're not going to be able to detect, right? That's a waste of everyone's time. So if I start with the telemetry, what telemetry do I have available? And then start to work within, okay, now let's get some, detections on the books and exercise some some procedures along with those. I think that's where to start, but it's gap analysis for me. So gap analysis meaning what telemetry do I have available, right? And of course naturally that also ties into what do I really wish I had that I just don't.
Well, I want to thank everybody for spending their time with us today. I think this has been really illuminating, both for me, who's kind of, I definitely get the philosophy of purple teaming, but never really broke it down with people that do it every day. So it's been wonderful for me, and I really hope the same for our listeners. So thank you all for joining me for another episode of This and Fine. Tune in next time.